I'm ready to invite my elders up. So there's two folks in the room, and there's one person who's coming in online. So can we get Charlie up on the screen? Ah, there you are. Hi, Charlie. Welcome. Okay, so Charlie, I'm going to introduce you first. All right, so I am meeting Charlie now for the first time. So it's a pleasure and an honor to meet you. And thank you for joining us. Charlie Burton is a native of Charlottesville, Virginia. And his book, telling his life story, which was called The Boy Beneath My Skin, is available on Amazon. And it's a story about a survivor of abuse, addiction, mental illness, gender dysphoria, who in the end shows his indomitable spirit to recover and live a rich life. Now, this may be just one man's story, but in many ways, it's a story about us all. Charlie recently founded STEP, which stands for Supporting Trans Elders Project, that supports elder trans men to continue to thrive as they age. Charlie is the owner of Charlie Speaks, where he conducts speaking engagements and training, and through his storytelling and his inspirational chat, he involves his audience to better understand what it's like to be a Black trans man living in the U.S. South. Charlie is a board member of Equality Virginia, and he also created a group called Black Trans Men Can Cook, which, and that will create the first cookbook created solely by trans men. And Charlie is currently enrolled at Morehouse College, and he is majoring in business administration and public health. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you.
Brian Belovich, down here. Now, I've known Brian for, I think it's about 10 years, right? And we first met at the U.S. National Transgender Health Summit in Oakland, California in April 2015. So that is pretty much exactly 10 years. And we've stayed in touch through email and on an occasional visit when I'm in New York City, where I go to fairly often. Now, Brian is a now cis gay man of trans experience. He's an actor, an author, a public speaker, and a mental health professional. And during the height of the New York City club scene in the 1980s, Brian lived as a vivacious trans woman. And that trans woman is Tish Gervais, who performed at the top New York City nightclubs, where she was billed as the bombshell of rock and roll. Now, Brian is the author of a 2018 memoir called Transfigured: My Journey from Boy to Girl to Woman to Man, for which he was named one of the 50 most influential LGBTQ authors of all times by Barnes & Noble. And also, he is the author of the 2000 GLAAD Award-nominated off-Broadway play called Boys Don't Wear Lipstick. Brian is also the subject of a 2019 documentary film called I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, and is a frequent guest on multiple podcasts. Now, Brian now works in private practice as a mental health counselor in New York City, where he uses his life experience as a now cis gay man of trans experience to help others who are exploring their own identity journeys. A longtime survivor of HIV, Brian advocates proudly on behalf of the LGBTQIA+ community in all of its wondrous expressions. So welcome, Brian. Our third panelist is Lucas Walther. Now, I first met Lucas about 30 years ago when I was making a presentation at the Gender Clinic in Vancouver, and needless to say, we were both a lot younger then. I had to check with Lucas because it seemed like I've always known him. I said, Lucas, when did we meet? And so that's when we nailed it down to the first time. Lucas Walther, I'm going to give you his last name again so you don't forget, has lived an extraordinary life, full of peril and resilience. Homeless at age 12, his experiences fuel his ongoing drive to bridge critical gaps in care outreach. His resume includes community counselor, group facilitator, mentor, advocate, educator, resource developer, and consultant. His frontline mental health work spans 50 years, more than 25 of those years specializing in gender diversity. Lucas plays a unique role supporting trans youth and adults, their loved ones, care providers, employers, and schools. And since 1997, he has educated countless doctors, teachers, and mental health professionals. In 1998, he established a still active discussion group for transmasculine adults. In 2004, while coordinating British Columbia's transgender health program, he established a peer-led support network for trans-identified people involved in survival sex work. And in 2012, he established a still active support network for parents of trans kids. In 2006, at the Gender Odyssey Conference in Seattle, Lucas was presented with the FTM Award, quote, in recognition for significant contributions to our collective communities. Well deserved. He continues to be a repeat invited speaker at numerous nursing, social work, and psychology postgrad programs throughout the lower mainland of British Columbia. So welcome, Lucas Walther. Okay, Charlie, you get the first question. All right.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. So you've done some really important things for the Trans Plus community, and of course, I thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to ask you more about what you're doing now in a few minutes. But first, I thought you've had to come through some really tough stuff to get to the proud place that you are today. And I think it would be helpful for the folks who are watching online and here in the room to understand some of what it's taken to get to be the Charlie Burton that you are today. So can you start by telling us about what it was like for you growing up in the U.S. South?
Yeah, sure. I first want to put a plug in that all three of the books that the two cookbooks and my book was a labor of love that Margot Wilson and I at Transgender Publishing did. It would not have happened without uh, Margot and her complete understanding of what this community is all about. And it's just amazing and an honor to work with her. Um, I've had I have the child abuse by the hands of an uncle for several years, which led me into this downward spiral of mental illness. But somewhere deep in me was a fighter spirit, and I just had to find it. Living in Virginia was not easy. Living as a black person in Virginia is even double. And then now, as a black trans man, puts his challenges almost daily. But the one thing that I think for me that helped me be able to get out, crawl out of the ashes and be the person that I am today, I cannot ignore my recovery. And for people, 12 steps just doesn't have to apply for alcohol or drug abuse. I work my 12 steps now just as a daily living. I would say to anybody who's out there, grab my book, not just because I want you to buy it, but sometimes I tell people I believe my book is a roadmap for you to be able to see that this guy was able to pull through. And I don't have the answer. I have no answer as to why I'm now an elder. I never thought I would even make it to 25, actually. And now that I'm sitting here a few weeks away from 65, um, is an absolute, it's a miracle. And so my only answer to that is that somewhere you've got to dig down. And if your family's not in your support, you've got to find chosen family. You've got to have support with people who understand, allies such as the Margot Wilsons and other people who have come in my life. And it takes a village. It takes a village, and it took a village for me to get to where I am today.
Thank you, Charlie. Um, I have another question for you now, and then I'm going to ask some questions of the others, and I'm going to come back around. Okay. So I understand that you didn't start your transition till you were 50 years old, roughly.
That's correct.
Now, can you tell us how you came to know that transition was right for you and what it took to make it actually happen? So first, how did you know? And then second, what'd you have to do to get it to happen?
So I live in Charlottesville, but I live in a rural little area of a little town called North Garden. You think about it, it doesn't even have a stoplight. You know, you tell how to get to people's houses by how many cows in their field. Yeah, Mr. Jones has 6 cows, and you turn right down that dirt road. So I had not a clue of what trans people were all about. I just knew I was in a body that wasn't matching what my mind was telling me. And I was just absolutely enraged with rage, depression. I ate myself up to close to 500 pounds. I just didn't know. Uh, I had no clue of what transgender was all about until I started dating my long term ex. Who's now a good friend, but I started dating her, and she was in Chesapeake down near Virginia Beach area, and she was huge into the MCC church. And I started seeing people who I would ask her what's the deal with that person? Oh, that's that person and they're trans, or what is trans? And so at age 50, I transitioned, and it was right about the time that the whole Chaz Bono thing was coming out. And I couldn't relate to Chaz. I mean, there were some things that matched. He was in recovery, and he was trying to work the recovery and the recovery of getting to accept their body congruent with their mind. And of course, I didn't have a mother like Cher. So I had nothing that could
No,
connect me
nobody
to that.
does.
Nobody knows, right? So I didn't have that connect, but I just knew there was something that wasn't right. I had gotten sober because I was told if I get sober, I'd have a better life. Well, at 5 years sober, I wanted to blow my brains out because I didn't know what was going on. And it wasn't until one weekend that I just started writing, and I wrote this letter to my therapist. And at the end, I said, I'm not a woman. And she jumped right on it. There were no services in Virginia and Charlottesville to help me. I had to drive almost an hour and a half twice a month to a place in Richmond. But it was when I started seeing people who talked like me, who thought like me, who really didn't look like me because most of the support groups were young white boys. But I used them because I had nothing else to use, just like in recovery. Now, I don't have the story that, the $1 million lawyer has, and he still goes back home to his, beautiful house. But I had one thing in common with him was just recovery. And so, it was difficult at 50. But it happened when it happened, and I'm glad that I'm where I am today.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of the other two
Okay.
panelists, and I'll come back with more for you. Thank you for that. Brian, next question's for you. So, Brian, during the height of the New York City club frenzy in the 80s, you had this very successful career as Tish Gervais, and you appeared at all of the big, well, not all, but really a lot of the big places. Some people in the room will recognize these names, but the Limelight, the Palladium, Pyramid, Studio 54 area, Danceteria. I was around New York a lot, and so these mean a lot to me, and some of the people in this room will recognize the names of those places. And you were the bombshell of rock and roll. Uh, Tell us about what it was like for you to be Tish during these very heady times.
Well, hi everybody. Good morning. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Aaron, for doing this. And yeah, it was a heady time, and it was the 80s, and not much was known about the transgender experience at the time. And in many ways, I felt like I was a pioneer because I was doing things. I sang with my own voice. I had a band. I was out there. I was just really doing what anyone else would want to do, who had dreams and ambitions. And it was a fun time. And the only thing about it that was not fun was the obstacles that I was always running up against. So like I was really fun to have around because I was, I was pretty messed up most of the time. But, I was drinking and using drugs at the time. And, my whole life was around the nightlife. And, but I always felt like at the time that I was just being who I was. And I didn't really think too much about like, like not being, who I was. I mean, it was just like I was in your face, and I had, what the kids call passing privilege. So 9 times out of 10, they didn't know, but, there was another moniker that I had was called the girl with something extra. And, so, I was outed as a trans woman eventually by some columnists in New York, and so then it became public knowledge. And so I was just living my life back then, and what I thought was my truth, but in actuality, it was not. It ended up not being that way. So, but it was a blast. It was, and it was right in the height of the AIDS crisis too. So, there was a really deep sense of community back then, and people really stuck together and really helped each other out, especially the women at the time. And so we were just, trying to get through it, and that escape of that time period in history with the nightclubs was a really nice sort of like Band-Aid on the time.
So, Brian, of course, we're all aware that you're no longer living as Tish, and I'm going to ask you to talk about that in a moment. But maybe we could just back up a little bit, and maybe you could tell folks a little bit about how you came to the first part of your story, which is, from boy to girl to woman to man. So, how was it that you became Tish, and then afterwards, I'm going to ask you about how it was that you became Brian again. So.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small, town in Fall River, Massachusetts, working class family. I have 5 brothers, 1 sister. I was a little queer kid, really, really pretty, long, dark eyelashes. We didn't have the word misgendered back then, but I was always misgendered. My brothers were all gigantic, muscular, big, boxers and football players, and I was not that, and I rebelled against that because I did not want that to be a part of. I don't know. I think it was a very smart decision for a little kid to make that decision that wasn't something that I was interested in back then. Okay, they were often crude, they were vulgar, and I just was too sensitive, and I didn't really gravitate towards that. So the messages that I got early on as a little kid were that whatever I was not right. And so I internalized this idea that there was something wrong. And so, I made the decision early on as a younger person that like, okay, if I'm not okay as I am, then I must be something else. And Charlie talked about like feeling like he was in the wrong body, but that was not my experience. My experience was more that what other people thought of me really informed who I was in my early life. And so when I was old enough of course, I came out as gay, and then I was dressing in drag, and I was getting lots of approval for that. And then, I fell with a group of other trans women at the time when I was kicked out of my home by my family. And, just whatever, if you thought it was a good idea for me to take hormones and get silicone injections and change my name, and, I would say, okay, sure, because I had no really strong sense of self, and that's where I kind of went off the rails with. And then being the type A personality that I was becoming, of course, I did it to the umpteenth degree and made sure that whatever I did was like gonna be like the best that I could be. And so my whole life up until that point was perfecting this female identity, and hormones and implants and, silicone and jobs and boyfriends and husbands. I married a soldier, so I did everything that anybody else would do. And I never really thought of consequences. I mean, I was mostly stoned most of the time because I'm also a person in recovery as well. I'm in recovery almost 39 years now from drugs and alcohol. So, so there was always a sort of like a little bit of a haze happening. But yeah, so that's kind of how the shorter version of how things began for me.
Thank you. And I'll say to folks, I'm not going to do a slideshow here of Tish, but you might Google Tish Gervais, Gervais. There's lots of photos, and you'll see that when Brian says that he did it to the nines, he really did. Okay, let's turn to Lucas. Lucas, thank you for coming. You have been tireless, dedicated advocate and support for countless people in the trans plus community and their loved ones. We're all in your debt for that. And I will ask you more about that in the second round of conversation. But first, I know that you two had a really hard time of it as a young person. As I said before, on the street at 12. Can you tell us about your struggles earlier in your life to find your way to becoming your own man?
I will try. I'm really thrilled to be here. I have no idea who that guy is that he just described. And I'm sure pretty much all of you understand when you're in it, doing it, you're just doing what you need to do. And then later when you hear the feedback, it sounds like someone else. It sounds like someone else. So I'm really humbled to be honored this way. I was adopted a bunch of times before I was 6, and so by the time I got to the keeper's family, the last one, I'm like, you're not getting in. Nobody's getting in here at all, ever. And so, I focused on school. I loved learning, and then puberty hit, and everything just went sideways. I'm 70, so I was born in 54. So we're talking early 60s or mid 60s or something like that. You guys do the math. I just knew that I was really effed up, but I didn't know, there was no language for this. There was no awareness of this. I just knew that all the other girls in the locker room celebrating, the changes in their bodies and their newfound interest in boys and that. I just thought, my God, I'm going to get caught. But for what? Right? I just figured, okay, this is because I was adopted so many times. That's what's wrong about me. And so in order to spare this family, the Walthers, that had found me at 6 and loved me, I decided that I would show them how much I love them by disappearing. And so that's what I did. It was the 60s. It was peace, love, and flowers as much as I could find. There is a really dark underbelly to the 60s as well. And as a 12-year-old girl, I learned a lot of street smarts by, learning how to dodge that. But, the one thing in my life that I regret is putting my parents through that. Because, I just went as far away as I could, and I ended up living in the graveyard behind Boston Commons, right by an area called the Combat Zone, which was notorious. And I was a 12-year-old girl. I found newspapers and a garbage bag from the garbage containers at the graveyard, and I bedded down at night. I knew I was prey, but I learned how to act like I had somewhere to go. And that's how I survived, panhandling and I had no idea. I mean, I hear, listening to Dallas and other people yesterday about what was going on simultaneous. I saw a picture of Jude in, what is that, 76 or something, right out there. And I thought, well, it wasn't quite 76 yet, but, I guess no one else had words for this either. But I just lived in the shadows. I stayed in the shadows for years and years and years, just vagabonding around, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere and believing that. I didn't feel like anybody else was shunning me. I was shunning myself, looking back. I self-medicated. I mean, at first I was I was sniffing pepper at night so that I could sneeze myself into being a little warmer because it was February in Boston, outdoors. And, I didn't have anything to compare it to. But I got trapped in a prostitution ring. I escaped the prostitution ring, a little later than I would have liked. But looking back, all these experiences help me now relate. I work with mostly unhoused people in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and they don't know my medical history. But my life experiences have helped me to. I'm following your footsteps. I have almost 30 years now coming up. Um, heroin was my go-to. That was just how I stayed on the planet, and it allowed me to function. And I didn't think about ever being addicted because I used it like vitamins. Back when there really was heroin around. And, I'm really lucky that I survived that, but there's such strong angels watching over me and watching over all of us. And I just, paying it forward has been my whole, I'm so grateful to still be alive and to have found different humans masquerading, angels masquerading as humans crossing my path at different, really integral times that just veered me one way or the other way. Or the ride that I got into, there was three guys with, with bad intentions, and it was after midnight. And, I used my communication skills, and the next thing I knew, they were driving me to a gas station so I could carry on. And they said, "Yeah, you were right. We were going to rape you." And I figured out right away who the lead was, and then I connected with him and made myself a real person. And now I understand so much of being homeless with the people that I work with. And they don't need to know that I'm trans, but they know that I've been there one way or another. And I'm all over the place. I know I am, but I need some indicator of how much time I have.
That's good.
Okay.
You want to keep going? Go ahead.
People know me as Lucas and the work that I've done because it was only after transitioning in the mid-90s that I came into my own and started showing up for life and drawing on. One of my big losses was not being able to go to higher education. I certainly had the wherewithal to do it. But I left school at 12. So, I eventually went back and got a piece of paper that allowed me to, take counseling programs and that. But I lost my train of thought.
All right, let me ask you another question.
Okay.
All right.
But no, there's just, let me see if I can get that train of thought back because it was relevant. And that's going to even put more pressure on me. Never mind.
Okay, I think my next question might help you. All right.
Probably it will, Aaron.
Okay. So the next question I had prepared, which I think may be where you were going,
Okay.
is how'd you find your way from such a difficult start in life to transition to be who you needed to be? And were there significant people who influenced your journey? And, what were the aha moments? When and how did things become clear for you?
They seem to become clear to the people around me before they came clear to me. As a, female-bodied person at the time, there's lots of room in society for us to cross-dress. It's not even a thing, right? So at least that reduced some of my distress and maybe camouflaged what was really going on for a while. But a girlfriend just decided we were going on a road trip to Seattle from Vancouver. And so she said, I've got some friends for you to meet. And it turned out to be, you know, Billy Lane, who some of you I know, and who is a trans man that had, I think, already transitioned a while before. He's quite public in his own identity, so I take the liberty of sending out major props to him. You know, when I met him, my world just kind of fell apart and came together at the same time. We must have talked for hours. He made all the photocopies he had of the copies of FTM International, and that's how I learned about Jameson. And it was not long after that I was on the phone to you down in San Francisco there or somewhere down there. You know, I need to set up a support group because how am I going to find people to talk to? And that's the one that you mentioned that's still going. You know, I eventually just, you know, found out there was a clinic. There was a world-renowned clinic at the time that was opened in 1984 in Vancouver. That was started in a little dungeon room in the bowels of Vancouver Hospital. You know, I still, to this day, I'm so grateful to the psychiatrists there, even, you know, looking like the Freudian dude that he was, right? But their hearts were in the right place and they got me, you know, they helped me to find my voice. And I kept using it. And, you know, all we need is another straight white guy taking up too much space, right? But is kind of how I edited myself. The misandry that I had internalized through going through the women's movement, the separatist movement was kind of close at hand. And then suddenly I'm visually changing into male and looking in the mirror. I triggered myself, if you can get that. I triggered myself with I'm a survivor as well. So, you know, masculinity was always a huge trigger. Anyway, you know, back to therapy and sort that out, learning about projection and, you know, and then I fell under just in closing, you know, I did end up coordinating the trans health program and endured 3.5 years of top-down bullying that was just vicious and malicious. And if Trump had been in place then, I could have pointed and said, that's what's happening. But it was so unreal that nobody believed me, not one person, except for other people that were enduring the same thing. And it broke me. It was from 2 other trans guys, and it absolutely broke me. Now I understand better that it does hurt us more when it comes from inside our clan, because we come in assuming that it's family. But you know, thanks to the love that that I have in my life and nurture in my life, that chosen family that I think someone was talking about earlier, maybe you, that we have to find chosen family, or maybe it was Charlie. You know, that's helped me get through. You know, classic survivor, nobody believes you. So that just brought up everything, but.
Okay, you can hang on to that
Oh, yeah,
microphone.
yeah.
That's yours. Okay, Charlie, thank you very much. And I'm going to go back to Charlie. That was really very moving. Charlie, back to you.
Sure.
I know that you've done quite a lot of leadership, both regionally and nationally around the U.S. And I wonder if you could talk a little while about what you have done and after you've described it, tell us what you think are your most significant accomplishments.
Great question. You know, when I first transitioned, I tell the story that I would drive to these different little conferences in Virginia, and I lacked no confidence whatsoever. I was extremely something. I don't even know if the word is shy, if you can believe that now, but uh, there are many times I would pull in the parking lot and just look at the door and watch the people go in. And I've driven like 2 hours to go to this event. And I just felt like I had nothing to give and there was nothing that I could absorb. And so drive back home and I'd be in tears. I'm like, okay, here we go. I've gotten sober, I've transitioned, and I'm still miserable. And I went to one particular conference, and we talk about the chosen family. Uh, up walks this beautiful black trans woman named Zakia who said, "Get up out your chair, baby, and you're gonna walk around with me today." And so I shadowed around with her. And after this little mini conference, she just kind of basically just pushed me up against a wall and she said, "There's greatness in you, but you have to find it. I can't find it for you. But you've got to find it." And that triggered me that I had to give back freely what had been given to me. And that's a lot of my recovery. And so whenever my mind goes, Margot can tell you, my mind's going a million miles an hour all the time on some type of idea of something all the time. And I started looking at our society as a whole, our group community. One of the most important things that helped me get my foot in the door was that I worked with Black Trans Men Incorporated, that is an organization that Carter Brown in Dallas, Texas created probably close to 14, 15 years ago, if more. And I was an initial part of that and just kind of grew into it, but still lacked finding my voice. And so I had to really practice on selling Charlie to Charlie. Not so much Charlie selling to people, but I had to sell Charlie to Charlie. I had to learn that, when I look in the mirror, I'm not looking at a butch lesbian anymore. I'm looking at a man. And many times I would brush my teeth even after I transitioned, and I wouldn't even look up in the mirror. I just keep my head down. I can tell you I'm looking all in that mirror today, and I like everything I see in it that reflects back to me. And so then I started fighting for causes. And one of the there have been so many angels in my life that are too many to mention. I hear that I see Jude's online. Jude Patton was one. Jameson Green was one. There have just been so many people who don't look like me, but we all walk that same path that just they wanted nothing from me but just goodness. There was no angle. And being someone who had been out hanging out, I didn't have to be out in the streets. I loved the streets because it was addictive. That's where I found my drugs. That's where I found my alcohol. And so I still had that same mentality going into this whole stage of a new life. Was that, why are you so nice to me? What is it that you want? How much does it cost for me to give to you? That was the mentality I have. And then I started seeing that people just wanted to see goodness in me. And I started creating groups. And one of the most important one that I created was back during the pandemic, and it was called Diversity and Recovery. And how that came to happen was that a young lady had been to one of the protests down in Richmond. She jumped online because that was the only place we could go at that point for recovery, was online virtually. She started talking about how the protests and everything was triggering her. Two men put her out in a breakout room, just bound her for speaking about it, told her that it was principles that you need to speak about. Only thing you need to speak about is recovery. We don't need to hear this other racial bullshit that you're putting down. Of course, being brand new, we find anything, any reason to go out. The young lady went out and she's never been back again. And so when I heard that story, I knew that she was a part of our community. And I said to the person that called me, if we don't like what's going on, we create our own space. And so we created Diverse and Recovery, which for those few years that we were just kind of tied down to a screen, it helped save some lives. And then, of course, like everything else, when the world opened back up, it fizzled. And then I wasn't through. I wasn't through. I was like, there's more things to create. So I go to Margot and I said, hey, let's pitch this deal right here of a cookbook. And Paul Margot just agrees with everything that I says. I think she agrees sometimes, even thinking that this guy is just so out in left field. But let me just listen to what he has to say, because some way it's going to come around to make sense. And she just lovingly just listens, and takes her little notes. And we both kind of looked up and thought, this is going to be a great, it's going to be a great deal. And we're just wallowing slowly. And whenever it comes out, it will. I think it's going to be fantastic. It's stories on what it was like to be in the kitchen as a little child, growing into transitioning, and the stories that you're sharing with your recipes. I've also taken my mother's cookbook, that a lot of it is just handwritten in her writing, excellent cook. And I'm going to create my own stories and kind of a tribute to my mother, who I hated all my life, but the last 3 years was my best friend. And so, and all that was from recovery and being the confident man that I am today. And so now I've got this last final piece of things that I had some as I get older, as we do, I had some health issues going on. And so the young man in my community in Virginia rallied around, would call me. One would call me every day. There was somebody calling me every day to check up on me, to make sure I'm okay. And I remember one Saturday, I was just deep in a depressed state because I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't move very well. And that's just not Charlie, and I'm fearing is, this is what I've got to look at as I get older, and I don't like it. And as it turned out, I'm fine now. But this young man drove from DC, which is 2.5 hours to me, because when he talked to me the day before, I told him I didn't have an appetite. And I knocked at the door, I opened the door, and there he was. And I was like, "What are you doing here?" And he was like, "You know what? We're going to hang out today. And if we have to go to 6 different restaurants to get your appetite triggered, that's exactly what we're going to do." And so, we went to a restaurant, Mexican, probably not the best choice later that night at 11 o'clock. The Mexican was the choice that we went to, but it boosts my appetite. Not only did I think it boosts my appetite, it boosts my spirit in seeing that as elders, we're always mentoring younger people. Now, why don't I just open the door and allow younger people to mentor me? And that's how we recreated this step. And I'm looking forward to it. We had a meeting. It's just these guys are so willing to want to be there for us. And so, it's STEP, Supporting Trans Elders Project. And we're just, yeah, I'm excited for it. But the one thing that was hard for me to do was that I had to find one of the younger guys to turn this over to kind of let him have the baby and I oversee it. And that's different for me because Charlie's always so used to being in control and taking care of it. And I think that's one thing as an elder now that I have to learn is that I have to step back. There's just to step back and allow people to help me, ask for help. And that's been so important. And lastly, again, I just can't plug Margot Wilson enough. My book, that book saved my life in many, many ways because I was able to finally put down. She saw in me what I'd always said that I wanted to be was a writer, and along with Jude had his little hand in all of that, and as Jude knows everybody, everything, he did that connection, and it has been one of the most rewarding connections that I don't. I feel like I don't even have to go to a therapist anymore. I just meet Margot once a month on the phone, and that suffices enough for me. But I can't, I can't push her and her company and her steadfastness and wanting to for us to tell our stories.
Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie, I'm not sure if you know, Margot is actually in the room and has been blushing through all of this.
Yeah, I did see her come in. That's why I'm talking about her. I'll send her a check next week.
Okay. All right. And I just wanted to say about your cookbook. My wife is loves cooking, and she never uses a recipe. She's quite proud of the fact she never uses a recipe. People are always saying, "Oh, this is so good. How did you do it?" She says, "I don't know. I just threw things together." But she has a wall of cookbooks. And she has a wall of cookbooks because she likes reading the stories that are in
Right.
so many cookbooks come with stories like yours is going to be. And so I live with someone who loves reading cookbooks and never uses a recipe. Okay, I'm going to ask Brian next. Now, we know that you're not Tish anymore. And I wonder if you could take a little time to talk to us about, what prompted you to move on from Tish and become Brian once again. And what have you learned about yourself and about gender as a result of your life as a trans woman?
Okay, in 5 minutes or less.
Yes, 5 minutes or
Let's see.
less.
Well, as I mentioned before, most of the time, now I don't know if this is clear, but I lived as a trans woman for almost 15 years and had, started in the 70s. And as Lucas was speaking and Charlie was speaking, I was flashing back on, I tend to like focus on the glamorous aspect because it was a very glamorous existence. But the underside of that was not very glamorous, the constant, you know, uh, rejection, the time period in history in the 70s and early 80s when very little was known, the danger. I did a lot of sex work as a trans woman because, we couldn't have a job. That wasn't possible. So most of my work was as a sex worker. And I would, be on the streets, jumping in and out of cars, going into fancy hotels. It didn't matter. There was always a risk involved. The fact that I'm alive and even sitting in this chair today is like beyond me. Angels, yes, always angels everywhere. And of course, would forget to tell men. Now we're out and open who we are, and it's not a secret. But I was on the DL back then, and so dangerous, so risky. Had guns pulled on me, knives, you name it. So there is, there's all the, there's the external, beautiful, stunning, trans woman, like, existence. But the other side of that was very lonely and very sad and very depressed and very isolating. And even as much as I perfected what I looked like externally, it didn't match internally. So when I gave up drugs and alcohol, I was a crack addict and freebasing cocaine in the 80s, in Hell's Kitchen. And when I gave up drugs and I gave up alcohol and I started to recover myself, I woke up one day and I was like, oh my, and went into therapy and started to explore gender. I think Aaron and I have had this in-depth conversation before about what is male, what is female, no one ever asked me what I thought about gender. It was always just informed on me. It was always put on me. And I felt so shitty about myself that I didn't feel like I had any agency to decide for myself. It's like I said before, if you thought it was a good idea, I did it. But then everything changed when a lot of people in the recovery community, if anyone here knows this, when you get sober, it's like being born again, not in a religious way. No, we're not going there. That's not what I mean. It's like rediscovering who you truly are and what you really like and dislike, and you start to become more hyper aware of what's okay, what's okay for you. And so for me, after a year of being sober as a trans woman, I woke up and thought like, wow, what the hell happened? I was like, and there wasn't anything that I did not do. I had looks, I had talent, I had education, I had everything. I worked as female. I married a man before same-sex marriage was even, I figured out a way to do that. I married a soldier. I lived in an army base in Germany. I was a housewife. I had a career. I was acting in plays, playing cisgender roles. I wasn't even out as a trans woman as an actor. So all of these things that I did, and none of it filled that emptiness that I felt about myself. So when I got sober, went into therapy, I was so depressed. I was suicidal. Oncoming trains looked good to me in the subway system in New York City. And I was like, what is going on? And I started to come to terms with, there are parts of me that are very feminine. And there are parts of me that are very masculine. And I never really acknowledged or accepted them, never even considered them. And so finally I was doing that work. And now we're at a place with gender where we know that gender is on a, I don't want to use the S word, but gender is on a broad framework of presentation. And so like I found that to be like the most incredible like aha moment that you mentioned. I was like, wait, I can maybe, I didn't want to have gender confirmation surgery. I was on the fence about that. I couldn't. The other part of it also is I tested positive for HIV in the 80s, and all the treatment modalities and things were being geared towards gay men. And when my physician came to give me my results, he said to me, he said, "Well, your test came back positive, but what did you expect? You're a sex worker. You're a drug addict." And I was like, wow, I'm really on the low end of like, where this is going. And so like there's nothing, so that was a factor back then. But I really was so unhappy. And I decided to, like, well, maybe if I just cut my hair and like maybe if I, maybe I could remove my implants, and, I know, and I don't want to get into the whole political discussion, but I come here in peace as a person who was trans. I'm not, I am an advocate for every expression of gender. I work with trans folks. I have trans clients. I think that I don't know me, I don't want to, that people get a bad rap, around making these decisions. But what I've learned is that we're all on this journey of who and what we are, and some of us land different places, and it's non-binary. I guess I'm non-binary at this stage of the game. I'm sort of like neither here or there. I do drag. I do plays sometimes. I'm asked to do, performances. So like I can entertain all of those things that I miss about Tish because she was quite the something. And she's still here with me. I joke that my pronouns are he, her, and him. Because it's crowded in here with all of us. But I acknowledge all of it. And then lastly, just to end here is like I don't know who it was that said it, but I think it was Charlie that we have to, I had a lot of shit from the straight community. I had a lot of stuff as a person in the 70s from the gay community. I was never really accepted fully in either. And so this idea that we need to stick together, especially now, more than at any time. And we need to really, really include everybody at this table. And I'm so grateful to be here to have a chance to just say that to you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That was beautiful. Thank you. So, Brian, thank you for saying all the things that you just said, and I'll just say that I've thought long and hard about would it be wise to bring you in for the panel here at this conference. I've thought about it for several years. This is the year we've done it, and I have absolutely no regrets, and I'm very pleased to see that everybody is open to and understanding your message and your place in our community. Lucas, back to you. So, Lucas, you've taken leadership in a number of ways, mostly or entirely in the lower mainland of BC. And I'd like you to talk about what you personally consider your most significant achievements in serving the trans plus community. And I use that broadly because I know you do a lot of work with families and folks who are not themselves trans, but that, where do you feel like the most important work you've done has been serving the community?
The first thing that comes to mind is the most important thing I did was figure out how to manage my triggers so that I didn't subject the reactionary person that I was before to people that like don't believe everything you think. is guess what I'm trying to say, right? Because get a reality check. You might be wrong. They might not be, saying something negative after all. I had a lot of healing to do before I even put myself out there. But I know that that's not what you were getting at. Bridge work has always been my thing, is bridge work. Looking for the gaps. What's not being, especially early on, there was very little funding, if anything. So I guess part of my heartache at, walking away from my family at such a young age, led me to want to work with the families. Parents would tell me they called this queer organization or that queer organization, and they had, really lame ass questions, but they wanted to help their kids, but they were being told they were being, by the kids that were volunteering and answering the phone and working out their own stuff with their own parents. These families were running into, well, you're just being transphobic, or, they'd run into the reactionary, the understandable stage that the young person was at, for example, or the older person. And so I felt that that was something that I could do to just earn my breath, and contribute somehow. I didn't have letters after my name, so funding was not going to be available as far as I could see. But the need was there, the desire in me was there, and the skills were there. Thank you, Boston Commons for learning how to, communicate from there throughout my life with all kinds of different people. And so, I set up these groups for parents, with particular focus on parents that were in need of talking to other parents that had cultural or faith-based considerations, that were why their reactions were, understanding their cultural considerations, their congregational, they'd come in thinking, well, I have to choose between my faith or my beloved child. And very quickly I could plug them into other parents that were like, no, we've been through this. We're of the same background. So, I think those families still get a hold of me. I lost the funding last year. I did find some funding through the Ministry of Children and Families, but, I won't get into how that happened. It was nobody's fault, but I ended up not being able to do it anymore. And I'm making ends meet doing my downtown east side work, and I love it, but I miss serving the families because their groups are all online, but many of them, English is not their first language. And so they really want to be in a room so they can see who's talking, talk to each other. And so I miss that, and it's not there either. So, if anybody has any funding tips, I have great references. I also, like, we're infiltrating in all our different versions of masculinity, as I'm speaking about this now. We're infiltrating maleness. And, and so my primary identity is male. My primary identity is not trans. I love to make sure people know that I'm trans at events like this, and more in different areas of my life that I go. But I feel that there's so many different ways to be masculine and to be feminine. And, having you on the panel, having so many people here embracing their trans identities in whatever way that is accurate. It used to be that, well, if you weren't going through a medical transition, how can you be trans? Right. Or, and then I think the whole thing flipped for a while, and like, well, if you're doing that, you're too binary, and so that doesn't count, kind of thing, right? And you get these looks of, what are you doing here? Because people don't realize that you might be trans, have gone through that journey. But I just want to say, there's so many different ways to rock a trans identity. It doesn't need to be a medical transition. It doesn't need to be gender dysphoria. Some of us had gender dysphoria. Many of us don't. And we're legitimately embracing a trans identity because we reject the binary. As a very masculine looking dyke, I guess I would have been considered non-binary back then. Now I'm invisible as a trans person. And so I don't get targeted by the creeps. They just kind of think I'm one of them. You know, But it's the visible trans people, and particularly the trans women that went through this after puberty, that to me have always been the role models and the heroes. Because in order to be their authentic self, I just had to, start testosterone and just wait, and lean on my brothers, my Jude and Jameson and Billy and that. But, in order to be authentic, today I met someone who's 59 and just beginning her transition. And, this to me is the hero's journey. I mean, I feel very proud of what I have accomplished in my life, and setting up resources, the FTEM et cetera group that's still going. Just a place for people to talk. But, I'm not targeted anymore unless I go into queer spaces and, and then sometimes that's why I have this. This is kind of my flag of, I might not just be this, some straight white guy that doesn't know much. I mean, I could do an LGBT panel all by myself with costume change, but I just want to say that, so the youth also that are part of the social movement, whether you're gender dysphoric or not, but the trans youth, this is evolving society like crazy. This is evolving society in ways that I'm not. I'm doing it in my own ways. I'm filling needs for sure, but I'm not evolving society because I look binary. But you guys and women and in between or whatever, I mean, I've got to catch up with the language too. But you're evolving society for the betterment of all of us because you're creating more space in society. I'm not creating more space. I'm creating more understanding in the work that I do for loved ones. But you're creating more room in society for people to just be exactly who they are. And so many youth I've met are absolutely fine with their bodies the way they are. They're rocking a trans identity and they're working on society to expand. And so they're in the bullseye. They're doing that hero's work as well. So I just want to celebrate, how you have exemplified that, as an elder coming, your journey to wholeness involved going through and through to now that you're here. And it's just a journey of authenticity that we're all embracing. And the conferences like this do so much, I think, to keep us all on the planet.
Thank you, Lucas. Okay, so I'll ask you first, Charlie, this next question. So many young trans plus people have told me that they don't know any trans plus adults, or even middle-aged people often don't know their elders. I remember the first time someone said that to me, because of course I'm of the generation where got on the front of the room tonight or this morning. And I remember the first time a young person said to me, I've never met a trans adult before. And it was like shocking to me because, I went through most of my life never meeting a trans child. And but I hear that a lot now, that young people are very hungry to know their elders and to know that they can live a long and productive life. And so each of you had a rough start in life. And you've made success of yourselves. You're here. I think everybody said, I didn't ever think I'd live this long. And here you are, and doing well and thriving. So what do you want young people coming up behind you to know about how to survive and how not just to survive, but to thrive as a trans plus person in a world that can be very harsh to us? So, Charlie, your advice for young people.
Yeah, thanks. We all have a story, and some of us are fortunate enough to get those stories published. Some of us are fortunate enough to sit on panels and tell our stories. But I encourage young people to, whatever your passion is, don't allow your transness that you think that needs to hold you back. I meet so many young people that are, and I'm in Virginia, okay? And so everything that you're reading about, everything that you're seeing in the last several months, I have experienced. I worked on a federal site February 10th, and the executive order came through and it shut us down. And the people that I worked with were people with disabilities. And so 18 of my people with disabilities were literally thrown out in the street to try to find jobs. And so I experience this current administration every day. If they had not shut our campus down, I was told by our director on that campus that my name had come up as a person that they were coming after because I was trans. And so I say to young people, we have to not walk in fear. And the only way that we do not walk in fear is that we bind ourselves together. One of the things that I'm doing with a lot of my young mentees, and I have probably about 10 or 12 of mine, and we meet a lot, is that I encourage them and I say, I want you to read about the Black Panther movement in the 60s and get away from thinking that they were just fearful gun-toting guys, but take a look at how they banded together and they met in houses and they constructed systems. I mean, they did housing, there was food, there was clothing, that they band together to help their community. And so, what I say to young people is that we have to stick together. We have to not react in fear. And you have to embrace your transness with all the beauty that you can embrace. And it's a learning experience for me. I mean, when non-binary, I still slip. I slip, and I'm a part of the community. And so I have to learn. And being on this panel and seeing someone who has just come out and then said, guess what? This is who I am. And, whether I belong on this panel or not, here I am. I can't imagine just being able to embrace yourself to that point that you were just so, excuse my language, fucking out and proud and saying, here it is. And if you don't like it, F you, because I'm going to live the life that I need. And that's what I need young people to see is that if you today choose to wear a muumuu with a beard, wear the muumuu with pride. If you choose to be stealth with pride. Be you. That's the thing that I encourage everyone is that, because let me tell you something, fear, what they taught me is false evidence appearing real. And that fear and that bullying that we're getting from this administration cannot last if we start banding together. Here in Charlottesville, uh, I'm just blown away. They have some type of picket going on every day, and they're holding these signs and they're saying, we are not accepting what you're doing to us. And so that's the same thing that the Black Panthers did in the 60s. They said, we are not going to accept what you're doing to us. And so we're not going to rely on you to help us. We're going to band together and help each other. And so, one of my last final things that I could say to anybody that you're young, you're questioning where you want to go in your path, you're so afraid that society might not accept you because you don't want to be that straight norm of a trans man or a trans woman, but you want to freaking live that life in between. Live it, and we've got you.
Charlie, I hope you can hear all the applause in the room.
Thank you.
That was inspirational. Ryan. So I won't go through the long introduction. The core of the question is,
I
what do you want
remember
the
it.
younger people coming up behind you?
Yes, I want, thank you, Charlie. Those beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words. Thank you so much. And, it made me think of when I was, a teenager and I was, I had that attitude like, I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want to do and F you. And that was kind of my attitude all through the 70s and 80s. I just, whatever it was that I guess what I want to say to young people is like, pay it no mind, like Miss Marsha P. Johnson would say, pay it no mind, just do you. You know who you are. You know what you want to be. You know where you want to go in life. And there's the thing we say in the recovery community: what other people think about me is none of my business. And I don't care. I really don't care. And I think I've always had that. I don't know where it came from, but I just always felt like, this is me, and you can take it or leave it. And the other thing, which is really important, is that we have to stick together and get organized. I was part of it. I was involved in ACT UP. I went to a lot of the ACT UP demonstrations in the 80s, and in New York City, and we have to do that now. Young people, especially. I'm a little too old to get out there, but I will get out there if I have to. Trust me. Um, uh, get involved. There's, I know you're not, I don't think you're having the same problem as we are in the States right now, but maybe in different levels. With your government is not the same, but we are having a real serious problem right now, and we need to really stick together. And no one can tell you as a young person, how to be. Like, I mean, I have a lot of experience with living as a trans person, living as a gay person, living as a person in recovery, but like, you know, that's my experience. Like, I'm never going to be someone that's going to tell someone what to do. But what I do know is that you just be true to yourself. You be true to you, and everything will work out for you somehow. Like, I never imagined that I would be here. And I'll be 69 next week. I mean, here I am. I just never thought I would be here, and just never shy away from what you dream of, what you want. Like you mentioned education. I went back to graduate school at 60. Don't wait till you're 60. Any of you young people, don't wait to get that master's degree like in 10 years, 20 years, because it's hard. So anyway, that's it. You do you as best you can, and the hell with whatever anybody else thinks about it. Like, I always just had a big fu to, like, I mean, even at a time when it was like, just not anything like it is now. So
Okay.
anyway.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, I'm quite the opposite. I'm like Princess and the Pea. I'm just, so thin-skinned in a lot of ways, especially when it comes from, within the community. It gets to me. So I've surrounded myself, and this is what I really recommend, surrounding yourselves with people who have got your back, people that care, as best as they possibly can, but if it's authentic or not. Stick close to people who love you is the first early words when I hit recovery. Was someone just said, just stick close to people that love you. And at that time, I wasn't letting anybody anywhere near me. But I've learned how to do that. And I shake my head going, what am I doing here? How did I get here? Largely by letting people in bits by bits. I mean, I'm chronically single, and that's the bone I toss my demons so they'll leave me alone. For me, that works. So it allows me to enjoy my friends, enjoy my life, and being able to build on things that I love to do, which is emotional intimacy. I really, that juices me. That that's one of my contributions. So in the parent groups, in the youth groups, in the F to M group that I started so many years ago, that was me finding my passion and finding what I could do to contribute. I thought about going back to school, but at the time, in my 40s, I needed to earn a living. I needed to find some way to get off disability and get out there, and I didn't want to be in debt. And so, I made that in my journey involved me just getting out there and trying to, put a face on, it was the year people thought F to M stood for flavor of the month, and so, the women's groups, the trans women groups were welcoming us, but I wanted to create a home base for trans masculine and then, and then cross pollinate. But I wanted to create that at the time here, there wasn't anything. So, for youth, I mean, look at what gaps aren't being filled for you. That's one idea to contribute if those of you that aren't up to here in research projects, which is so valuable. I mean, funders need proof, funders need proof. So, for so many years, I negated the academic part of all this because I never had funding, so I didn't understand the benefits of having something like this. You need funders, you need stats. God bless the people that can do stats, that can do research and that can do stats so that someone like me can be here, talking about my journey to wholeness and trying to fan the embers of people's own journeys to their own wholeness. So yeah, look for the gaps that are there that bother you and make noise about them. Maybe it's not going to be you that's going to fill that gap, but shine a light on it. What you need that's not being fulfilled, shine a light on it, and maybe somebody who's, who has that capacity will hear you and pick up the thread. But mainly surround yourself by people that that care about you. And I guess that's, not very profound words of wisdom, but, and keep infiltrating. Keep infiltrating.
Keep infiltrating.
Be loud.
And be loud about it. Great advice. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to call it to a close. We're already 15 minutes over schedule, but I wanted to make up for the time we lost at the very beginning, so your coffee break's a bit shorter. We do have concurrent sessions beginning at 11:15. I want you to please join me in thanking this panel for their contributions. Charlie, it's a standing ovation in the room.
All right, I like that.
Everybody's on their feet.